Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is your boy Vic coming to you live on a Monday this time because I wanted to wait to watch UFC 202, which we're going to be talking about here in a second, and I also wanted to watch the WWE pay-per-views that were going on this weekend before I got on here to talk to you guys. So, the first thing we're going to talk about though is Ryan Lochte. Ryan Lochte. And I mentioned him before the other swimmers because he's the guy that's more, I guess, famous. You know, he was the rival to Michael Phelps for a few years there, and, they were back and forth, winning against each other until ultimately Phelps pulled away. And if you guys haven't heard yet, what his deal is they had an incident while at the Rio Olympics. Lochte, three of his other teammates, they were heavily intoxicated. They were out vandalizing property, doing things they definitely shouldn't have been, and they claimed that they were robbed at gunpoint. What actually happened, however, was Ryan Lochte and his teammates were vandalizing property, and the guards came to tell them they couldn't do that. Over in Brazil, when you vandalize property, there's an immediate fine. It wasn't that they were being held up, it was that under Brazilian law, when you break something, you gotta pay for it to get fixed, which kind of makes sense here in the US. Kind of feel like that's what we should do here, but that's not the point of what I'm trying to make. Ryan Lochte decided to take it upon himself to lie, tell everyone that he was robbed at gunpoint, also added the fact that he was fearless even though he was under gunpoint, and telling the apparent robbers that he would not get out of the car and he would not give them any money. That's kind of where a lot of people decided that his story didn't make sense because if someone's pointing a gun at you and they want a small amount of money, you're probably going to give it to them. So, as it went on, Brazil denied the allegations. The Olympic Committee denied the allegations at first. And then over a period of time, the Olympic Committee decided, okay, well, maybe there's some credence to what's going on because video apparently does show an altercation, so maybe they're telling the truth. As it actually turns out, though, they vandalized property and had to pay a fine. The guards came out, they did draw their guns. They were never pointed at Lochte specifically, apparently. They were never at his head. And he basically lied about the entire thing. Ordinarily, I wouldn't say that this is a big deal. Ordinarily, I'd be fine with this. But in this case, you're already having a place in Brazil which is under great scrutiny for the Olympics because it's not really the place that you want to hold an event like the Olympics. They were having very serious security issues leading up to the games. It just wasn't something that most people wanted to be at, whereas a lot of athletes pulled out. There's a lot of that. So Lochte, adding to all that fervor that no one wanted to be there by saying, "Oh, we got robbed. We went and we got robbed. Look what can happen in Rio when you just go to compete in the Olympics." Now, as it turns out, that's not how it went. Ryan Lochte, you should definitely be ashamed of yourself. You still don't admit to lying. You claim you exaggerated what happened, which I'm not sure how you can't admit that it's a lie, even when you basically say, well, I exaggerated certain things. Well, pretty much you exaggerated everything. There wasn't much about your story that was true, except that there were guys that pulled guns on you. The rest was not true. Alright, so now we're going to talk about UFC 202. UFC 202, in my opinion, was better than UFC 200. It was better than UFC 201. It was a fairly good pay-per-view. I want to shout out my boy Troy Saha for hooking me up and letting me see UFC 202 so I could bring you guys the breakdown today. So, there's three fights that I want to talk about. One, Cerrone versus Story. Cerrone at 170, he's gaining ground. They think he could go for a title. He looked great against Story. I mean, no one really beats Story up like he beat him up. Donald Cerrone, however, doesn't want to stay at 170. He wants to go to 155, which most people think is a mistake for him. Uh, he looked very dominant in this fight. There was very little that he could have done differently. There was very little he could have done better. I don't see why he doesn't just stay at 170. He looked great. The next fight I want to bring you guys is the shortest fight on the card. It was Anthony Johnson versus Glover Teixeira. Anthony Rumble Johnson versus Glover Teixeira was one of the fastest fights I've ever seen. It lasted a total of 13 seconds, and it was won by Rumble with a giant uppercut to end it. It was pretty much exactly like you thought it would be. I did not think Rumble was going to lose that fight because he's, in my opinion, the superior athlete. Teixeira's getting older. It just didn't look like it was going to go well for Teixeira, and it definitely didn't. Uh, Only problem with that fight is that Teixeira laid on the canvas for quite a while. People were a little worried for him, but apparently he's fine. He got up. All is well. We look forward to seeing Rumble Johnson versus Daniel Cormier, who is the light heavyweight champion. And we're going to see how that fight goes in the future. Now let's talk about the main event, which I think was probably the best UFC fight that I've ever watched that didn't result in a finish. Uh, Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz at 170. Conor moving all the way up to 170 when he's actually the featherweight title holder at 145. That's incredible to me because you're saying that you're going to take on a guy who generally fights at 170 on his terms just because you lost the previous fight. And you're a title holder at 145, which means, 25 pounds is a lot of ground to make up. In fact, Conor didn't even actually get to 170. He was 168 at the weigh-in. So that's a heck of a disadvantage right away. And, I'm pretty sure Nate Diaz bulked up after the weigh-in, as most fighters do. It was a slugfest right from the very jump. McGregor, he looked to be the superior striker throughout the fight. He dropped Diaz several times, bloodied him up, battered him. It was a very, very good technical striking fight. McGregor used a lot of leg kicks to weaken the movement of Nate Diaz. I think he did a good job. If you use a leg kick, that also means that it's harder to take somebody down because you don't have the legs to drive. I thought that was a very smart move and a very smart fight fought by Mr. McGregor. Now, the thing about this fight, and the reason that it was such a great fight, is both guys, for the most part, McGregor did a little bit of bicycle riding at certain points throughout the fight, but it was all based on his pacing, which was the thing that he messed up on in the previous fight, was that he didn't pace himself. And I guess he kind of figured that he could drop Nate Diaz and take him out, but Nate Diaz is one of the toughest dudes out there, man. He could take some shots and keep going, and he did just that in this fight. I mean, he was taking all kinds of punishment. His face was completely swollen, bloodied. He had cuts under and above his eyes. He was plastered. He was a crimson mask. I mean, this guy, and he kept going. He was smiling throughout the fight. He was talking trash throughout the fight. You kept it moving, which is what made this a great fight. McGregor, for his part, did exactly what he was supposed to do, which was stick and move. Try not to get, into a position where you have to trade for a very long time and wear yourself out. Diaz did exactly what he needed to do, which is try to put the fight up against the cage, put your bigger body on your opponent, and make sure that you don't allow him to breathe as easy, which is what happens when you're up against the cage and there's a bigger man on you. So I thought both guys fought the fight they needed to fight. It's just that McGregor being the superior striker, did more damage to his opponent. And I thought that was the key to this fight. Um, I don't have a problem with the decision. I kind of felt like it would have been a good time to say it was a draw, but I feel like they needed to give one of them the win because people hate draws. I understand that, but if any fight was a draw, it was that fight, in my opinion. Both guys landed, both guys hurt each other, both guys did exactly what they needed to do, but ultimately they gave the I guess, majority decision to Conor McGregor. It was a good fight. It was excellent. It was one of the best fights I've ever seen the UFC put on, especially after the debacle at 200 with John Jones testing positive, with Brock Lesnar testing positive for performance enhancing drugs. And, you know, you had a guy in Anderson Silva at 20, or excuse me, at 200 step in to fight Daniel Cormier. That wasn't much of a fight. Silva really wasn't ready, and it was just a cash grab, in my opinion, on his part. So 202 lived up to what 200 should have been. I thought that each guy did what they needed to do, as I said, and they put on a great performance. So in the next episode, which will come literally as soon as I stop this recording, we'll be talking about the WWE pay-per-views that were over the weekend and the closing of the Olympics and the overall theme that I thought the Olympics had and how well it did, and basically all that there was to talk about for the Olympics we're going to cover in the next episode. So stay tuned. I'll be coming back at you in a minute.